There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard or sleeping too little. It's quieter than that. It settles somewhere behind your chest, somewhere between your ribs and your routine, and it just stays there. You wake up with it, you carry it through your morning, you scroll through your phone before you've even properly opened your eyes, and somehow the day already feels heavy before it's really begun. And the strange part is, most people have simply accepted this as normal. Not because it's comfortable, not because they've made peace with it, but because somewhere along the way, the anxiety became so constant, so woven into the texture of ordinary life, that it stopped feeling like a symptom. It started feeling like personality, like background noise you eventually forget to notice. Visual cue, phone screen glowing in a dark bedroom, 6:47 a.m. Notifications already stacking up. You probably know what I'm describing. That low-frequency hum of unease that follows you from the moment you check your phone in the morning to the moment you check it again before sleep. The feeling that something is slightly wrong, even when nothing specific is wrong. The persistent sense that you're behind, that you're missing something, that everyone else somehow has access to a version of life that's slightly more manageable than yours. It's not dramatic, that's the thing. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly shapes everything. And what's interesting, what's genuinely uncomfortable once you start paying attention to it, is that this feeling isn't just a personal struggle anymore. It's an industry, a massive, carefully constructed, extraordinarily profitable industry built almost entirely on the premise that you are not quite okay. And that with the right product, the right subscription, the right app, the right routine, the right version of yourself, you could be. Maybe that's part of the problem, not the anxiety itself, but the way modern culture has learned to sell it back to you. Because somewhere between the wellness market and the self-optimization culture and the endless stream of content designed to make you feel simultaneously inspired and inadequate, anxiety stopped being something people tried to eliminate. It became something people managed, maintained, quietly fed, and the system that promised to help you feel better became, in many ways, the same system keeping you just anxious enough to keep coming back. That sounds cynical. I know it does. But stay with this for a moment, because the reality is actually stranger and more human than simple cynicism allows. Most of the people selling calm genuinely believe in what they're selling. Most of the people buying it genuinely need something. And somehow, in the space between those two sincere intentions, something quietly went wrong. Think about the last time you felt genuinely, completely calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from exhaustion finally winning. Not the numbness after a long day when your brain simply stops processing. Real calm. The kind where your body isn't bracing for something. Where your mind isn't running background calculations about everything you haven't done yet. For a lot of people, that memory is surprisingly difficult to locate. And that's not a coincidence. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called baseline shift. It describes what happens when a temporary condition gradually becomes the new normal. When the nervous system stops registering something as unusual and simply recalibrates around it, adapts, absorbs, and what was once a response to pressure becomes indistinguishable from the resting state. This is what happened with anxiety in modern life. Not overnight, not dramatically, but slowly, across years of overstimulation and economic pressure and digital acceleration, the baseline shifted. And a generation of people stopped asking why they felt this way and started asking which product would help them manage it. Visual cue wellness app open on a phone. Breathing exercise countdown. Person sitting alone on a kitchen floor. The global wellness industry is worth somewhere around $5.6 trillion. That number is almost too large to feel real. But what makes it genuinely interesting isn't the size, it's the structure. Because unlike most industries, wellness doesn't sell you a product and send you home. It sells you a relationship with your own inadequacy, a subscription to the idea that you are always one habit, one supplement, one morning routine away from finally feeling okay. And the brilliant, quietly troubling thing about that model is that it only works if you never fully arrive. If the meditation app actually resolved your anxiety permanently, you'd cancel the subscription. If the journaling practice genuinely healed the underlying pressure, you'd stop buying the journals. The product can help. It often does help, genuinely, in real ways. But the industry surrounding it has a structural incentive to keep you in a state of managed insufficiency rather than actual resolution. That sounds harsh, and maybe it is, but consider how these products are marketed. Not as cures, always as practices, always as ongoing relationships. always as things you maintain rather than things you complete. Which is interesting, because real psychological healing, the kind that actually changes how a person moves through the world, tends to look less like a subscription and more like a slow, unglamorous, deeply personal process that doesn't photograph particularly well. But that version doesn't scale, and it definitely doesn't trend. So instead, modern anxiety culture gave us something more aesthetically coherent. Clean linen, soft lighting, carefully chosen fonts on pastel backgrounds. The visual language of calm sold to people who haven't felt calm in years. And somewhere in the distance between what the imagery promises and what the product delivers, the anxiety quietly continues. There's a specific moment that a lot of people recognize, but rarely talk about. You're standing in a pharmacy or scrolling through an online store at some point after midnight, and you're looking at supplements or sleep aids or stress vitamins or adaptogens with names you can't quite pronounce. And something in you genuinely believes that this particular thing might be the one that finally helps. And so you buy it. And maybe it helps a little, or maybe it doesn't. But either way, within a few weeks, you're back in the same place, looking at something else. That cycle has a name in consumer psychology. It's called the hope purchase. The transaction isn't really about the product. It's about the feeling of doing something. The momentary relief of having taken action against a problem that otherwise feels shapeless and uncontrollable. The purchase itself becomes the dopamine hit, not the result. And the anxiety industry understands this perfectly, because anxiety, unlike most problems, is extraordinarily difficult to measure. You can't look at a blood test and confirm it's gone. You can't point to a specific moment of completion, which makes it the ideal condition around which to build a consumption loop. There's always another layer to address. Always another dimension of wellness left unexplored. Always a quieter version of yourself still waiting somewhere just beyond the next purchase. This is where the psychology becomes genuinely uncomfortable to examine, because most people who are caught in this loop aren't being naive. They're not being foolish. They're doing exactly what makes sense given the emotional reality they're living inside. When something hurts and the culture around you offers a product shaped like relief, you reach for it. That's not weakness. That's human. But the system that benefits from that reaching has very little incentive to address what's underneath it. And what's underneath it, for most people, isn't a magnesium deficiency. It isn't a lack of morning structure. It isn't the wrong journaling format or an insufficient breathwork practice. What's underneath it is something considerably less marketable. Financial pressure that doesn't resolve between pay cycles. The slow erosion of feeling like your time belongs to you. The particular loneliness of being constantly connected and rarely genuinely seen. The exhaustion of performing a version of yourself across every platform and every social context until you've quietly lost track of which version is actually real. These things don't have a product SKU. They don't fit inside a subscription tier. They can't be addressed in a 60-second guided meditation between meetings. And so the industry, elegantly and almost invisibly, reframes the structural as the personal. It takes conditions that emerge from the way modern life is organized and reflects them back to you as individual failures of self-regulation. Your anxiety isn't a rational response to genuinely difficult circumstances. It's a wellness gap, and wellness gaps, conveniently, have products. If these quieter conversations feel like something you've been looking for without quite knowing where to find them, you're welcome to stay around. This is the kind of thinking this channel exists for. The reframe is subtle enough that most people never consciously notice it happening. But once you see it, it becomes very difficult to unsee. You start noticing it in the language. The way anxiety content is almost always framed around what you could be doing differently, rather than what the conditions around you are doing to you. The way the solution is almost always internal, almost always personal, almost always something that requires purchasing or subscribing or optimizing. Almost never something that requires the world to change rather than you. None of this means the tools don't work. That's the part worth holding carefully. Meditation genuinely changes how the nervous system responds to stress. Sleep hygiene genuinely affects mood and cognition. Therapy, real therapy, the slow and uncomfortable kind, genuinely helps people understand themselves in ways that matter. The tools themselves aren't the problem. The problem is the ecosystem built around them. The way legitimate psychological insight gets packaged into content designed to generate engagement rather than resolution. The way genuine human need gets converted into a consumption identity. The way people who are already exhausted get handed a 17-step morning routine and told that their suffering is essentially a productivity problem waiting to be optimized. That version of wellness doesn't reduce anxiety. It just gives anxiety better branding. And maybe the most quietly radical thing a person can do right now, inside this particular cultural moment, is to stop treating their anxiety as a project to be managed and start treating it as information worth listening to. Because anxiety, at its core, is communicative. It's the nervous system registering something, a misalignment, a pressure, a need that isn't being met, or a boundary that isn't being honored, or a life that's moving in a direction that doesn't quite match what the person living it actually values. It's uncomfortable precisely because it's trying to be heard, and when every available cultural response to that signal is a product, you never actually have to listen to what it's saying. You just have to buy something until it quiets down enough to ignore. There's something almost poignant about that when you sit with it for a moment. An entire generation of people, genuinely trying to feel better, spending real money and real time and real emotional energy on systems that are structurally designed to need them to remain slightly unwell. Not out of malice, not through conspiracy, but through the simple, cold logic of markets finding the most profitable relationship with human pain. And the exit from that loop isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like anything in particular. It's quieter than that. It might look like pausing before the next purchase and asking what you're actually hoping it will do. It might look like noticing when content about healing is making you feel worse about yourself rather than more understood. It might look like recognizing that some of what you're feeling isn't a personal failing, but a completely coherent response to circumstances that genuinely are difficult. It might just look like sitting with the discomfort long enough to hear what it's actually trying to tell you, instead of immediately reaching for something to make it stop. That's not a product. It doesn't have a subscription tier. It won't trend on any platform. But there's something in it that the anxiety industry, for all its scale and sophistication, has never quite managed to replicate. The feeling that you're not broken, that you don't need to be fixed, that maybe what you're experiencing makes complete sense given everything you're quietly carrying. And maybe that recognition, small and unglamorous as it is actually where something real begins.